Hey guys, Josh with Epic Channel, and today we got a winter edition, January, snow on the ground. It's cold, folks, and we're going out to look at someone's truck. I believe it's a C15 BXS, I believe. And he said his jakes were getting weak, and then all of a sudden, bam, pop, pop, pop. Sent me a picture of valve bridge and a button off one of the rockers. He said he took one of the valve covers off to find those. They didn't shoot out through the valve cover or anything like that, but got a show haul hat on. Subscriber sent me that. Thank you very much. Let's go look at it. So yeah, folks, this winter edition, as you can see, quite cold, although not quite as cold as most of the Midwest. Obviously, most of the country was going through some bitter cold. That polar vortex seemed to push off to the east of us, so we didn't actually have frigid cold. But this customer lives outside of Old Town, which Old Town and Newport are kind of the same town. They're on the border between Washington and Idaho. Of course, Idaho Panhandle is pretty thin, so you're almost always next to a border here. Driving up there, and this is the engine. It is a BXS, and what was going on with it? Well, customer was driving. It's a log truck, and it just sounded like the engine blew up, apparently, making a loud popping sound, and he pulled the valve cover and found this, a bridge and one of the floating buttons there. Look at that. Very proud. Way to go, dude! Cat filters all the way around. He's a subscriber. I've actually worked on this truck a few times back when I was at Cat. Love that little step stool there. That's probably one of the best purchases I've made since leaving Cat. And you can see BXSs are weird because they have the IBA housing separate from the compression brake housing, but you can see the bridge is missing. Valve bridge is missing there on number 2 cylinder. That's not good. Yeah, that's really the only damage he could find. That's when he had it towed and called me and said, can you please help me? So hopefully, of course, obviously when you hear a bunch of popping through the intake, you don't know what happened. He was thinking the worst. He was thinking maybe it dropped a valve or cam went bad, something like that. But what do we find? Well, so far, we've got one broken bolt there. We've got the bridge missing. But we need to get this overhead apart and find out what the heck is going on here, folks. Now, this head is only about 1.5 years old, so you might be wondering why the hardware break? Was it not torqued properly? Well, usually when you change a head, you end up reusing a lot of the fasteners here unless the customer specifically wants it replaced. And a lot of these overhead bolts, outside of the injector hold-down bolts, are okay to reuse. Now, of course, you never know how many times those bolts have been off and on and torqued, so definitely more than once because his head had been replaced. So it's hard to say, you know, is it a good time to always replace all the fasteners? It really increases the cost of doing any sort of work to the engine here when doing a repair. And of course, usually if you're replacing a head or getting an end frame, you're already spending a lot. So how much do you want to add to that? It's a gray area as far as what the correct answer is. So what we're doing here is we are removing the, I'm going to call it the jake housing, although this is actually not a jake. This is what they call a pack brake. And you might be saying, well, it sure as heck looks like a jake to me. Well, on some of these Cats, the C-15s and C-15s, until they went to the MXS serial number, you could have either a Jacobs compression brake or a pack brake. And we'll discuss that a little bit later when we're going back together here. But for now, I'm just trying to get it apart to see how much damage it is. It may have damaged the cam, it may have damaged the head, and that's really what we need to find out. And you know, the first step of that is just getting the parts off here. So none of the other bolts were damaged, other than that one outside one. Luckily, it wasn't damaged or broken flush with the pedestal there. So what we got here is, you can see I have the IVA housing on here, and this is actually a mistake. What I'm trying to do here is get the rockers off. And I should have known better. I was trying not to pull the IVA housing, but you have to. So the IVAs actually sit over the intake rockers, and it'll make more sense later in the video. We'll look at the intake and exhaust rockers. They're actually quite different on a BXS. BXS have a very specific intake rocker that is much longer because they actually sit under the IVAs. And since I wasn't pulling the head here, at least I didn't think I was trying to not pull the IVA housing, but unfortunately, you have to. So after turning my brain on, I decided to pull the IVA housing off, and guess what? The rockers came off. So what we're looking here is, was anything damaged? Is the head broken? Is it cracked? Anything like that? We got the bolt still sticking out there. We're going to have to try and extract that. Luckily, it's not broken off flush or inside of the head bolt, or not head bolt hole, but the pedestal rocker arm bolt hole there. I've had them before where they're broken flush or inside there, and it is very difficult. Luckily, this has quite a bit sticking out there, so we should be able to get it out, I'm hoping, without too much trouble. You can see there, don't see any damage to the valve stems. That's a really good sign. Obviously, the valves, if damaged, would be a big-time problem. There's the seal for the IVAs. It gets separate oil than where the compression brake housing is. It gets oil fed through the valve cover base there, instead of to the rockers. The rockers still get oil, of course, but separate feed. So just looking it over, I don't see any real damage. The cam looks to be in good condition. I don't see anything with the valves. I'm looking for the little piece that broke off for the rocker adjuster there. I'm looking at the pedestals here. With that bolt broken, it looks like some wear in the head there, especially next to the one that was broken. So we have a broken adjuster nut, we have the bolt, and we have some wear in the head there. Just comparing the wear in the head to both sides there. It's very common to see wear there. Not a good sign though, because when there's wear, you can get a gap, which when there's a gap, you lose tension on the bolt head. So what broke first? It's hard to say. It might have been a small gap had worn into the rocker shaft here that caused the bolt to loosen up and then break the bolt off. Maybe that's something with the adjuster breaking off. The adjuster breaking off is very unusual, extremely unusual. You do not see that very often. I've seen more broken rocker arms themselves than the adjusters. You can see the wear in the rocker shaft there where it was sitting against the head. I recommend replacing that rocker shaft, even though it's quite expensive. I think he said it was maybe $400 or $600 just for the rocker shaft. And we were lucky, folks, with some pliers to loosen that bolt up, and it came right out. So we've got it all disassembled. The customer went out and got parts. He had called Cat and said, I need an exhaust rocker for BXS. And they gave him an intake rocker. And you can see the intake rockers look kind of weird because you can see they have that extended part past the adjuster for the IVAs. They are not interchangeable with the exhaust ones, unfortunately. But luckily, the adjuster and the adjuster lock nut are the same pitch and diameter, so we were able to swap those out and just use the old rocker. So looking at it too, the intake rocker here is kind of weird because it doesn't have a replaceable bushing or bearing, whereas the exhaust rocker did. Same diameter, but just kind of weird. So you can see the IVAs are different. And I think if Tim from our Hayden parts store would have got this call, he would have got it right, folk. He's the type of guy that you need. But before we go back together, how about a little destruction of the week? This week's destruction of the week comes from Rex. We actually have two different ones, but this is a valve out of a 3116. It was also making a popping noise out of the intake, I believe he said, but yeah, wonder why. So he said that the customer just replaced the one valve, put the head back on, and it's still running today. So our next destruction of the week is from Robert, and maybe you can spot a little alignment problem here. Yeah, that one is pretty dang broken. Glad I was not involved in fixing this, because that is a big job. Look at the differential compared to the leaf spring mount there. Super bad, but he said he got it fixed and put back together. Speaking about putting things back together, we got our overhead here. So what are we doing here? Well, of course, we're putting it back together. Looks like I don't want to say he lucked out, because any engine failure is not good, but this was a lot less bad than he was thinking. He thought that his engine was shot, but luckily, looked like all it needed was new hold-down bolts. He got a new rocker shaft. We replaced the adjuster and was able to put it back together, which is pretty good. You know, usually when you hear really loud banging and poppings inside the engine, you always fear the worst, folks. And of course, on a Cat engine, or really any of these large diesel engines, there's really no cheap repair, but it's about as cheap as you would get. Now, we were talking about pack brakes earlier, folks. This is a picture of a pack brake brochure, but the pack brakes are Very similar to the Jakes. And most people don't know that when you say pack brake, you think of an exhaust brake, just the butterfly valve and the exhaust. But Pack Brake, the same company that makes the exhaust brakes, did make a compression style brake similar to the Jacobs style. Now the problem is a lot of the Pack Brake ones, the tags are missing. You can't look up the serial number, the part numbers really that much anymore, and I believe they're very hard to get. So if you did have a broken Pack Brake, it can be a real pain in the butt trying to find a replacement one. Luckily his was in very good shape, other than it has some surface rust on it. Not really sure why there's surface rust on the IVAs and the compression brake housings here, but if I remember right, when I worked on it a while ago, so it's like almost 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half, it also had those on there, but it had some coolant consumption problems then when we were looking at it. But luckily got everything put back together. He said it wasn't even due for an overhead, but it ended up being that some of them needed adjusted. So we did end up doing a full overhead. We was going to have to do one over the front ones here anyways. Put her back together. And of course it was running good. Did a couple programming things for the customer also. I think he was pretty happy with it. So was I. Thanks for watching.